Broadcasting from the Hip Hop Weekly studios, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Civic Cypher, where our mission is to foster allyship, empathy, and understanding. I'm your host, Ramses Ja.
He is Ramses Ja. I am Q Ward. You are tuned in to Civic Cypher.
Yes, you are. And we are glad to be back in the studio together after some time apart handling business around the country. But that means that we are back to business as usual. So stick around, because today we are going to be having a conversation with Portia Allen-Kyle. For those that don't know, she is the civil rights attorney who is now the managing director of Color of Change. This is an organization that we're familiar with here.
Indeed.
But for those that aren't, Color of Change is the nation's largest online racial justice organization. They help people respond effectively to injustice in the world. As a national online force driven by 7 million members, they move decision makers in corporations and government to create a more human and less hostile world for Black people in America. We are going to be having a conversation about the dismantling of the Department of Education, the implications of that, and really how this new administration affects the plight of Color of Change and similar organizations. It's a conversation that we have to have, have had to have a few times, and we may end up having it a few more times. But it's important to know kind of how these changes are affecting, orgs that have been pursuing social justice. And it's important for you to know, our listener to know, how you can support. And so hopefully when we have the conversation with Portia Allen-Kyle, we'll be able to get to all of those things and a lot more, because again, as I mentioned, this is more important than ever. And, we built the show.
Yes, indeed.
For this purpose. And so we're really excited to have that conversation. But before we get there, of course, it is time to kick things off with some Ebony Excellence.
Shall we?
I think you shall.
All right. A new report is revealing encouraging statistics about Black women in education.
This is from Forbes magazine, by the way.
According to findings compiled in a study by the National Center for Education Statistics, Black women have been obtaining degrees at a consistently high rate for the last 8 years and counting. Information collected about the higher education among African Americans between 2009 and 2010 shows that Black women accounted for 68% of associate's degrees, 66% of bachelor's degrees, 71% of master's degrees, and 65% of doctorate degrees awarded for Black students during that time frame. By both race and gender, the study also shows that Black women are enrolled in college at a higher percentage than any other group, including white women, Asian women, and white men. However, while the study does shed light on many positive aspects of Black women in education, some of the overall statistics are still immensely troubling. For example, as of 2012, only 15% of students enrolled in college were African American, a drastically low number relative to that of the 60% of white students enrolled. Additionally, while Black women continue to pursue higher education at increasing rates, they make up only 8% of private sector jobs. Overall, the study proves much of what most of the Black community were already very much aware of. We've come a very long way, but still have quite the journey ahead. These numbers don't shock me at all. I think having 6 sisters kind of shapes this narrative for me before I even need to look at statistics.
Yeah.
But when we talk about a meritocracy and those who are qualified but not represented in positions of power and positions of influence and in the professional space, we realize that all the fuss about DEI is greatly unfounded, but we knew that already.
Ooh, all right. So speaking of which, Portia Allen-Kyle, how are you doing today? Welcome to the show.
Yes, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
We tell our stories from the beginning, and we would love the opportunity to introduce you to our audience. So, of course, I gave a little bit of a background on you, and Q and I have, read up on you, and we've actually kind of known who you were for some time. But for those that don't know, just give us a little bit of background, where you grew up, where you went to school, what motivates you on your path, or what motivated you to adopt this career path.
Yeah, so I'm a Jersey girl, born and raised in Jersey. Currently, in New York, but have really, being from Jersey has really shaped a lot about how I see the world, how I see, the future. And like part of that is growing up just seeing and like experiencing and living just like very stark differences in the way in which people where you live determines so much about, what your chances are, what your outcomes, are. I'm a product of public schools, went to a vocational school for high school. And so, really understand very deeply so much about, not just so what I thought I understood in going through public schools, and, what I have learned even more as I've moved through my career is, all of the ways in which the system is set up to fail, and all of the ways and all of the reasons why it is even more important to make sure that we are holding, folks accountable. And so, like, we have really been inspired, by friends, motivated by, family experiences. My grandmother in particular, huge motivation in my life. She was an HBCU grad back in the 40s, before it was even, she went to Southern University before, was even, before anti-discrimination protections and before the Civil Rights Act. And so, before she was able to, really go out and teach what she was, trained to do, but had that value of education and all the ways that it shaped her. And so some of that has really passed down as well. Choosing a career in civil rights and trying to just do what I can for the betterment of Black people and all people, has really been the mission and the job.
Portia, Ramses and I have been familiar with your story for so long, and the New Jersey always stood out to me. My first professional formative years after college, I took an internship in Manhattan, but I had to live in Newark because I could not afford to live in Manhattan. When things got a little bit better, I moved to Weehawken, and, I got friends in North and South Jersey. So every time I hear Jersey, I get excited. So that's always colored part of your story for me. As Ramses said, though, we tell our stories from the beginning, and not all of our listeners will be as familiar with you as we are. Tell the listener a little bit about the history on Color of Change and the mission of the organization.
Absolutely. So Color of Change is an organization that was founded, we're turning 20 this year. And so 20 years ago, if you can believe, in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. And so, it was a moment in time where, Black people were out begging for their lives, literally begging for the government to do something. And we're often left to die, right? Where the media, had a responsibility to report on what was happening, that made choices to decide to report on Black people as looting while white people were doing all they could, for survival, right? And so Color of Change was, born from a moment of these, very stark, very plain injustices, from an email that was sent to about 1,000 people by our founders, and has grown into a movement and an organization that at its core is about leveraging narrative. And so that, to the origins, holding media accountable, and that Katrina coverage, has filtered through the organization to today. An organization that at its core is about holding government actors accountable. And so thinking back to, really in the DNA of the organization is making sure that government works for people in the ways in which it is supposed to, in the ways in which it is charged, and for all people, not selective in who it works for and who it doesn't. And then, holding corporations accountable. And so, we as an organization leverage the power of narrative and our organizing and the power of people to hold corporations and government actors to account, making demands, to pursue and further racial justice, and making sure that in the face of injustice, we have a theory here that we organize in joy, so that when it's time to mobilize and take action in the face of injustice, we're already in deep relationship. And that's what Color of Change is about.
I'm gonna skip ahead here because Q and I have been having a lot of conversations on this show about corporations, and obviously, as I mentioned, we've been doing research on the Color of Change. It's an organization that we're familiar with, but obviously just to kind of get our bearings before having this conversation. That word has come up quite a bit, that holding corporations accountable. And we live in interesting times, and Q will follow up and kind of make that live a little bit more. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on the boycotts that are taking place right now. Because at least for me, I find that in a moment where there's a lot of hopelessness for marginalized communities in this country, that that maneuver, boycotting, still provides me with a sense of power and control over shaping my own reality. It provides a sense of community, where I might not be interacting with people out in the streets whose political beliefs align with my own, but I do get that sense of community when I choose where to spend my money and critically choose where not to spend my money. And so, again, holding corporations accountable. This is really just my own thoughts while we're here. Your thoughts on the boycotts and yeah, just your thoughts there.
Yeah. So I think it's a great question because it is always good when there is organic momentum towards a collective end.
Okay.
Right. And like needing to be able to, people get upset, right? Like people get frustrated. People are, tired of these companies playing in their face, right? They're tired of these companies taking advantage of, gouging, folks for every dollar they have. Every, time you go to the store, something is that much more expensive, even more expensive. You have stores like Target that, have done their entire, marketing campaigns around bringing in, Black customers because they are going to be the people that carry Shea Moisture and Taraji's hairline and pattern and TGIN and all these and Tabitha Brown and Jungalow and all these Black designers, and then to turn around and say, actually, we're not going to do that anymore, right? And so like the desire to want to boycott, to not spend their money, to be more judicious in spending money is a natural reaction, and one that does give folks a sense of agency. And like we need people to feel powerful. We need people to want to take action and be moved to action in the face of injustice. I think there's the next level question for the landscape and the ecosystem is how do we galvanize that like individual energy to collective ends to make sure that as a block, as a community, as a movement, that the sum of those individual actions really deal real blows to institutions of power. Mm-hmm. And that's a place where boycotts, at least on the individual level, get a little bit more hazy in terms of what's the end goal and what's the impact, sure. And what's the prerequisite organizing necessary to make sure that that impact is going to be had, that devastating blow is going to be felt. And I'll just kind of give an example. Boycotting Target, if the goal is to deal a blow to Target, we need to collectively be okay with the fact that Amazon may profit, Walmart may profit, people, may go to kind of all of these other places that maybe are not doing exactly what we want them to do, maybe also have walked back their DEI commitments. But, the reality is if most people want to get to a Black grocery store, there's not a Black grocery store. It's not about where you're going to buy your clothes and, spend your money at restaurants. It's like, where are you getting your toilet paper? Where are you getting your, sure. Your body wash? Where are you getting your aluminum foil? Right. Yeah. And so, the very fundamentals, and that's where, it gets a little bit, I think, hazier, but it's never a bad thing for collective momentum and wanting to, take advantage of moments to galvanize. Our entire theory around organizing is how to, really identify moments where there, is really momentum and to channel that energy into strategic action. And so that wanting to be in control and take action is a necessary part of anything that comes next down the line.
So all of us are dealing with the reality of our administration. And they have an agenda that is in direct odds, in direct conflict, in direct opposition to the mission of an organization like Color of Change. Talk to us about some of the problems that this administration has introduced for Color of Change and the work that you do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think an agenda that is opposed is probably an understatement of what's happening and we're experiencing now at the moment, right?
Sure.
So we've been talking about this as a neo-segregationist agenda that this administration is pushing. And, what that really involves is attacks on all fronts, on the infrastructure and progress of civil rights. And so, it really, what we describe it as is, it's an agenda that attacks and is eliminating civil rights protections and anti-discrimination protections under the guise of merit and equal opportunity, right? It's the, promotion of misinformation in a number of different ways under the guise of free speech, pretending that, it's about allowing folks more freedom when in reality, their, very clear desire is to suppress Black power, Black vote by, maintaining control over information and mechanisms of information and the flow of information and the lack of regulation. They're capturing government agencies and functions under the guise of efficiency. And we know that it really isn't waste, fraud, and abuse, that, the real trouble there is the excessive corporate greed and unchecked corporate power that is on display in this takeover of government. And very blatant attempts for private corporations to, assert their interests in the public sphere by taking over people's data, their IRS information, their, social security information, cutting off essential services. This is an agenda that, very openly peddles hate for profit, and they're doing so under this false narrative of deregulation and free markets, right? They're rewriting history and, trying to basically remake the image of America as absent of Black people, of LGBTQ people, of devoid of people with disabilities, really trying to erase in attacks on Black history and attacks on, in banning books and all of the things, really trying to erase people from the public sphere and the public image of America to create this image that is a white cultural image of what they call the golden age, which is probably, late 1800s post-Reconstruction white maleness is essentially what they're going for. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we have to stand up against all of that. Like, it is all a farce. It is like all a con. It is all a scam. And like needing everyone to really mobilize, see what's happening clearly in the ways in which it's connected. And that if they're successful, everyone's life will be worse. And worse for generations, not just today.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because you're right. If they're successful, then this does fundamentally make America great again for that one group of people. This is something that, of course, we've known for some time, but, you laid it out so plainly. And, to Q's point, in discussing kind of the plight of color of change, this administration being at odds with that, you're not wrong. I do think that is a bit of an understatement. You know what I mean? Like, it's the plainest way to say it, like with words, but this is like an assault. It's not, we want something different or we want something counter. No, we want you to go away entirely. Right.
Yeah.
Not that we want to win. We want you to disappear. And so I think your point is well made in that regard. So let's lean into that a bit. Talk to us about maybe some of the creative approaches that Color of Change has or is or perhaps may consider deploying in the future to fortify itself against this administration. I know that the Department of Education, the dismantling of the Department of Education is a big deal. So, we can start there, but, what is it that you feel can be wielded to kind of preserve our identities and a path forward, a path toward an equitable go in America for those of us who have been historically marginalized?
That's such a great question, because I think, to me, the most important thing, someone asked me the other day, like, aren't you panicked? And I'm not panicked, not because what is happening in this moment isn't scary. It's like definitely scary, right? Like none of us alive today have lived in this type of in America, right? Like we are all entering a new era. And there's an aspect of that is scary, but part of what both myself individually and I think at Color of Change, we are very clear-eyed about is the work has always been the long-term, slow burn grunt work of building power and organizing. And that doesn't change just because, that doesn't change, just because the political dynamics change, right? Like,
Sure.
We have to invest in each other. We have to invest in building in the infrastructure. We have to invest in organizing people both on and offline, meeting folks in real life where they are. And that remains the work. And the way to do that, for us is then to also be clear-eyed about, what we're for and who's standing in our way to live in the world that we want to live in.
Okay.
Right. And so like, if we want a world, which I think most people do, where like folks are able to provide for themselves and their families, right? To, have a job, be able to take care of their basic needs, afford, rent, afford healthcare, afford, a little bit of leisure, maybe definitely like look forward to retiring, then needing to be very clear-eyed that like the folks that are standing in the way of that are, often these very large corporations, like they're, the folks who are fighting, tooth and nail to dismantle the Department of Education. They're the folks who are fighting, with all that they have to undermine the power of labor and unions. Mm-hmm. They're the folks that are fighting with everything they've got to, strip folks of Medicare, and Medicaid, to undermine the infrastructure that we have for healthcare, and needing to expose those people every step of the way. In moments like these, there's no neutrality. And so you are really either a part of the problem or you are a part of the solution and building towards, something different in the future. There is my entire business is the destruction of society and protecting the interests of the elite while society is being, deconstructed. But don't worry, I, donate some pro bono hours for some of these law firms that are being attacked, or, don't worry, we give some corporate donations to, whatever group is in need over there. It doesn't balance out, right? Like you actually have to choose the side of a better future. You have to choose justice and then act accordingly. And those are the types of choices we're making in this moment. Those are the types of conversations and, realization. In order to bring people together, sometimes people talk about big tent, how to bring more people to the majority, more people into the fight. Giving folks a clear vision of exactly what we're fighting for, not just what we're fighting against, is like a critical ingredient in that recipe. And it is more clear than ever. Like, we know the world we don't want to live in. We're in it, right? We've been in it for hundreds of years. We're still in it today. We know that world very clearly. What we don't know is what it can look like if we govern with values of love and justice, right? We haven't experienced what it can look like if we govern from a perspective of abundance and taking care of everybody and our neighbors and not everybody looking out for themselves. Mm-hmm. Like, the individual strategy has not worked. This capitalistic strategy has not worked. The putting profits over people, that has not worked. We have, to me, it's very clear we have to try something different. And that's, what we're, working and organizing towards at Color of Change.
Portia, speak to us about the dismantling of the Department of Education. What does America look like without a Department of Education?
It's funny because I also think we know what that America looks like too, right? It looks like public education prior to Brown. So the Department of Education is a direct legacy of the Civil Rights Movement, right? Mm-hmm. Like, the promise of the Civil Rights Act in education as a pathway to opportunity, the promise of Brown v. Board of Education, right? In prohibiting or striking down separate but equal and, prohibiting discrimination in public education. None of those promises were meaningful without enforcement. And the Department of Education has been, every step of the way, the agency that ensures that the states and local, governments and Board of Education follow the law and ensure that people are able to access opportunity, right? And they do that, through civil rights enforcement of, laws that provide for the provision of special education services. The Department of Education also administers, student loans, and student loans has it always been perfect? No, not at all. Has it allowed folks to access opportunities that prior, to the administration would have just been out of reach because of a lack of funds? Yes. Like, they administer Pell Grants, also critical to, opening up opportunities, to higher education for students. And so there are so many things that the agency does that not only are critical to protect, but without protecting them and allowing them to be eroded, whether that is through, the firing of critical, agency staff, whether that is this silly proposal to send some of the functions to other parts of the government and trying to trick people, into the idea that don't worry, it'll just be it'll be the same thing. It'll just exist in other places. The Department of Education has really been critical in holding open the promise of opportunity, and recognizing how important education has been to economic mobility for Black people. We really should then be concerned about what it looks like in the generations to come, about the role that education plays and how it plays it, and whether, that promise is even possible to fulfill. In addition to all of the very practical questions that everyone across the country is going to experience, right? Like the dismantling of the department and the eroding of the funding won't just impact children, although it will impact the 90% of kids that attend public schools. Right. But it'll impact, if it's not this year, it's the year after, when states are trying to figure out how they're going to pay for their schools. And, localities are trying to figure out how they're going to pay for their schools. They only have a couple of mechanisms. And the primary mechanism is taxes. And so everybody will, across the country will potentially be impacted if the federal government abdicates its duty, to provide education and opportunity through funding and the funding of critical public school infrastructure nationwide.
Keep on riding with us as we continue to broadcast the balance and defend the discourse from the Hip Hop Weekly studios. Welcome back to Civic Cypher. I'm your host, Ramses Ja.
He is Ramses Ja. I am Q Ward. You are tuned in to Civic Cypher.
Yes, you are. And we appreciate you sticking around because we are having a fantastic conversation with the one, the only civil rights attorney, Portia Allen-Kyle, the managing director of Color of Change. For those who are unfamiliar, the Color of Change is the nation's largest online racial justice organization. They help people respond effectively to injustice in the world. And as a national online force driven by 7 million members, they move decision makers and corporations and government to create a more human and less hostile world for Black people in America. We're having a conversation about the new administration and how that affects social justice organizations and the plights of those organizations, hers in particular. And a quick note, I want to make sure that I say that our Ebony Excellence segment earlier was erroneously credited to Forbes. It actually comes from Essence magazine. But right now we're going to get to what comes from Forbes magazine. This is our time to show you how to be ABA, become a better ally. Baba and Q, take it away.
A 21-year-old man in New York has been cured of sickle cell anemia following treatment with a pioneering gene therapy, according to his doctors. New York resident Sebastian Ozil was treated with a pioneering new gene therapy approach called Lyfgenia, developed by biotech company Bluebird Bio. Mr. Ozil received the treatment on December 17th, 2024, and has not had any symptom of sickle cell anemia since, leading his doctors to believe that the treatment has likely cured the disease. Sickle cell anemia is a serious inherited disorder of red blood cells which mostly affects Black and Hispanic people. There are over 100,000 people with the disorder in the U.S., and the condition causes a range of symptoms including blood clots and strokes, and a resultant reduction in lifespan of 20 years on average. It's caused by inheriting defective copies of a hemoglobin gene, causing hemoglobin, which carries oxygen in red blood cells, to be subfunctional. The defect causes red blood cells in affected people to be sickle or crescent-shaped instead of disc-shaped as normal, limiting the cell's ability to carry oxygen. Sickle red blood cells are also more prone to clump together and cause blockages to blood vessels, causing severe pain and tissue damage. Previously, people with sickle cell anemia have been mostly treated with therapies which can control but not cure the disease. Some people have been cured by giving them bone marrow transplants from external donors, normally a close relative without sickle cell anemia, but the procedure does not always work, comes with a host of side effects and a risk of dying. According to the National Institute of Health, about 1 in 20 children under 16 receiving bone marrow transplants for sickle cell anemia have died, and 1 of 10 of people 16 years or older.
You think of certain things as kind of like quintessentially American, things that people will do no matter what because they are American. Things that people will get no matter what because they are American. And to see this administration villainize the Department of Education as though it's somehow corrupt, somehow wasteful, whatever, without substantiating any of those claims. And then, just with the wave of a pen, dismantle this, it's now a legacy department. You mentioned Brown versus the Board of Education, which was decades ago. So this is now fundamentally who we are as a nation, as a superpower on the global stage. It's crazy how there's a surprising calm associated with it. And in terms of the administration, how they handle the optics around it, like the president signed that with Black children around him, so as to say this is not to, disproportionately affect Black children. This is going to be a benefit to all, right? And so they got these props that they use to, it's such a crazy time to live in. And I know I can't state that enough, but we're stuck here. Right. And I know that can be very frustrating for people. And I don't want to pretend like it's not frustrating for us who are kind of the voices and are kind of leading movements here and there. But, for people that don't have a microphone and an audience like you and I and Q have today, that still feel like doing nothing is insufficient. Talk to us about some ways that maybe individuals can resist the forces of this administration. We and I don't want to state your brief here, but I do want to mention that, we talked about the boycotts, and that's obviously one way that we can go about doing it. But Target has, and I don't know if you've heard about this, but Target has pushed back on that, saying, well, the Black products don't sell, and the people that we've hired or that we've kind of put on the store shelves have only made products that appeal to Black people. And so the products don't move as quickly. And so they need like more in the way of development. That's something to which I pushed back and said, if you can lose money on a Black Friday with loss leaders to get more people in the store, then there's a business case that you can make for that. And on top of that, if you have Black products on the shelves and you're committed to working with these creators and these Black entrepreneurs to develop the businesses alongside this aisle in Target, then, you can commit the resources and the business strategies and so forth to develop the brands. You don't just give up after a couple of years. In any event, that's just me kind of leading you in the direction. I didn't want to do that. But again, the question is like ways that individuals can, in your own house, when you go to work, you come home, you take care of your kids, you put them to sleep, you wake up tomorrow, you got to fix the garage on the weekend. What are those people? What can they do to maybe help all of us resist the forces of this administration?
You said so many things, and so there was.
I know. I'm sorry.
Running through my mind. Well, I mean, the first thing that was running through my mind is I really wish we could like get aligned to stop allowing people to use our babies as props, but maybe that's a separate conversation.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong.
But the second thing that started running through my mind was, how just not plausible, like just actually not believable, some of the arguments that these corporations and folks are making. And so like even on the attacks against diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the administration's position that like these are illegal and reverse discrimination, like if that were to be true, then all of these companies across industries with all of their counsel in separate law firms and all of these colleges and all of these programs had to all come to the same wrong conclusion about the legality of these programs and about, what they do and how, like, when you really break it down, what had to happen to get some of these programs together, the idea that they're like all just illegal and running afoul of the law and discriminating against white people is like actually kind of laughable as as a premise. But to the question you actually asked, not the question I wanted to answer, like,
We'll do both. I mean, we're here.
it's, there is so much people can do on an individual basis. And I,
Okay.
really will say it all matters because there's levels of engagement, right? Like there's really levels to this.
Mhm.
And people organizing their family at Thanksgiving is just as important as like showing up, in the street for protest, right? Like we all have lanes that we occupy. Um, we all have a role in those lanes and a role that we could play very well, right? Like, so if your starting place is I'm new to this trying to learn, then like the best thing you can do is go be well informed because our people are subject to misinformation. And if your family is like my family, we got the text chats, the WhatsApp chains, some are still sending email from their AOL, accounts, like, and, trying to figure out what's real, what's not. Got an email from my aunt about like her social security, windfall and this and that. Like we're all trying to figure out what's true when we're taking in different information from all places. Some of those places more reputable than others, but like it, anybody that can, take the time and do the work. We all have that cousin we call when we have a question about, maybe money or something. We have that, person we call when we have a question about, that we trust as a messenger, et cetera. And if you're one of those person, as many of us are on at least one issue, be the reputable source and not, the
I like
source
that.
that fans the misinformation.
I like that.
Right? Like the second thing, we need institutions. And I don't just say this, as Portia, who is, the interim executive director of Color of Change. I say this as like someone who understands very deeply from an ecosystem perspective, the role that all of these various organizations play. And we can't all play the same role, right? Like we need someone who is more amenable to the inside, who's going to kind of do their thing that then allows Color of Change from the outside to come in from a different angle and go a little harder and push, a little further.
Sure.
Right. We need organizations that are, focused on, whipping together attorneys. We need folks who are focused on the, media and narrative. We need people that are going to take on those democracy and voting fights, who are going to organize students, who are going to, but all of those institutions need funding and resources. And more importantly, they need engagement, from folks. And so for folks looking how to, do something and stand up, become involved, whatever that choice is for you. Find an organization and love it. Like love it with your time, love it with your resources if you can, love it with your energy and your expertise, because we all need reinforcement and support from the community in this moment. If we're going to weather the storm, because our institutions will be under attack. Okay. And we've seen that in history. We've already seen it to start today. The third thing that I really, in addition to, kind of being the source, educating and being the source of, good information, to, becoming involved with organizations, et cetera, when see something, say something is like maybe a shorthand way to put it, but there are often times that we see injustice in any form, right? Like we're at work and somebody says something really messed up. And instead of saying, hey, that was wrong in the moment and calling it out, we'll maybe give some private consolation to, somebody who was wronged or hurt or discriminated against or aggrieved. This is a moment, and the hate that we're experiencing, the like neo-segregationist agenda that we're experiencing thrives in silence. We have to, speak up. We have to push back on these ideas and have to be really loud about it, because they will drown out the ecosystem. There's just more. There aren't folks at the same, there's no Twitter for or X for justice at the moment, right? Blue Sky is trying to be a thing. It does not have the reach of X. It does not have the reach of Facebook. It does not have the reach of, of Instagram or Meta or Reddit or many of other things.
I see your point. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the infrastructure of hate is deep. Mm-hmm. And the infrastructure that props up right-wing agendas and propaganda is really, really deep. We need to, really figure out the ways to counterbalance that. And part of that is, even in those spaces, to continue to, rise up. Part of it is making investments in a different set of ecosystem and infrastructure. that's going to get to our people and find our people where they are.
Portia, I want to stay where we are for a second. You spoke about kind of being the source for good information. And in the spaces that we all work in, we admittedly and knowingly have access to more accurate information than most people. The problem I've been facing in my ecosystem, and I've shared this with Ramses with increasing frustration by the day, is that it seems that no one wants to be properly informed. Everybody just wants to be right. So they'll post something or blast something off and it'll be wrong, and I'll go fact check and do the research and bring them accurate information, and they just have no interest in the information I'm bringing, even though it's far more accurate and far more true. Using our tools and our resources to kind of galvanize our communities around good information, it seems that all of us have also learned that there is wealth in writing. Because people who are seeking out information do still read. Ramses and I are working on a book really about radical, candorist allyship with intention. Like you said, you can't be a passive ally anymore. You can't be a neutral ally anymore. You can't just not be racist. You have to be anti-racist. So we're working on a project now to that end. However, you are an author who I think a lot more people should be following and should be getting more information from. Can you talk to us a little bit about advice to thrive by? Because we want listeners to be able to tap in with that as well.
Oh, that's very kind. So thank you. One of the lessons and takeaways that I've had across, like, it really actually doesn't matter what role I've been in, is that the bench is too small. There are not enough of us who are not just where we are now, we're already somewhat outnumbered in this capacity, but those who are coming up behind, we have not necessarily invested the time, the resources, the energy to build up that next generation, to make sure that when it's time to step aside, it's time to step aside, right? And I would love nothing more. I'm not as young as I used to be and not as old as I hope to get, right? But I fully anticipate and want to be, when it's my time to step aside, to be outflanked by somebody coming up younger who's like, hey, you're not pushing us bold enough. You're not taking us far enough. We should be demanding more, raising the standard, and really, towing the line. And so Advice to Thrive By, was really born from that desire on how to build up the bench. And particularly for attorneys and for public interest attorneys specifically, there isn't really a clear career path, for those who want to come into this and do this type of work. And there certainly aren't a lot of cheat codes or kind of behind the scenes on like, hey, this is, kind of how it works. Here's how to engage in some strategy to get, from where we are to where we're going. And wanting to provide some of the advice that would otherwise require insider information, backgrounds, just hidden things that people who, have been in space know. But if you don't have access to spaces, or you're the first one from your family or the first one, from your social network, may just not know, that can help open doors. And like that was the impetus, with the goal of, really perhaps trying in a personal way to open more doors in a more lasting and systemic way, where one-on-one mentorship was never going to get to scale. As much as I love it, it's very fulfilling, but like, we can't mentor ourselves out of systemic injustices, right? And so then how do we pass information that allows people to take advantage and allows people to engage and equips them with the tools that hopefully makes their journey and their pathway a little bit easier? Mm-hmm. Not abdicating duties of mentorship and sponsorship altogether, but wanting to, make impact that's a little bit more lasting.
Portia, I first want to say thank you for just making time for us. These conversations are so much more important than we realize. I think a lot of our constituents, a lot of our friends, a lot of our colleagues are dealing with this combination of anger, frustration, and hopelessness. And we turn out to be the voices that they trust. And we know this because people walk up to us and tell us, we are more necessary now than we were a few months ago. And as hard as it is to accept the gravity of that statement, we've heard it enough times to know that it's true. So someone like yourself making time to talk to us and just inspire us, because even we have those days where we're looking around like the sky is falling and we have no idea what to do next. How can we support you? Where do we follow you? Where do we look for you? If we want to get in the support Portia business, if we want to be your brothers and bodyguards and allies, and we want more people to read this book, tell us and tell listeners where they can find you.
Yes. I mean, you can always find me at colorofchange.org, right? Like, feel like go, join in. We are on some of the platforms we campaign against. And so you can also find us on X, like on Instagram, on Facebook, where our people are, frankly, in the corners of the interwebs. The one thing I will say in terms, I'm so happy and like appreciative of the opportunity to be here. And I would say it is, folks like y'all and, shows like this that are how we are going to get our people back. That won't happen talking to people, through the New York Times and the Washington Post. Like, that just isn't where our folks are. And so it is, y'all play such an important role in the ecosystem. Like, I know I've said ecosystem 1,000 times, but it is such an important role in any way, to be supportive, to, engage, to let folks know about our work, keep people informed, and let people know how to get engaged. Glad to be able to do so.
Well, we just followed you. We sent you a message. So we are definitely going to lock in. We would love to have you back on this show. We'd love to have you on any one of our other shows or all of them. We'd love to continue to build with you. This is a moment where we are, we've always been about, solidarity and kind of galvanizing all of this energy, from folks who want to make the world more equitable for all of us. But now it's not just a nice thought. Now it's kind of mission critical. We kind of need each other more than everything. So we'll definitely do our part. As I mentioned, we're following you. Our hope is that we can continue these conversations moving forward. But for now, I just want to say thank you on behalf of me and Q and Chris and all of us here at the Black Information Network. Thank you very much for coming on to share your time and your brilliance and, the work that you have done, the work that your organization has done, the work that you are doing, the work you will continue to do. It's a joy. It's an honor. And, count us among, your brothers, when you need a little extra on this side of the world and the media side of the world or whatever, because we got the bullhorn still too, and the batteries do work. So we can hit the ground anytime. All right. Once again, today's, what do you say?
There's a day of action. And so any way, if you can highlight, there are events going on across the country. Color of Change is, one of the sponsors of that day of action. It's really about hands off our Medicaid, hands off our student loans, hands off our healthcare, like hands off food for our children, hands off SNAP. And so if you can amplify that, get folks to attend and hopefully turn out, that'd be wonderful.
Oh, we are all over it. Don't worry about that. That's kind of what we do. We do believe in direct action around here. So I'll leave you to interpret that for your own purposes. All right. And that is going to do it for us here on Civic Cypher. So we appreciate you tuning in. Once again, I've been your host, Ramses Ja.
He is Ramses Ja. King Ramses Ja is how I refer to him. I am Q Ward, and I appreciate you guys once again tuning in with us on Civic Cypher.
Yes, indeed. And just so you know, that actually is my name. It's on my birth certificate. So, King is not just flattery around here. It actually is my name. Anyway, do us a favor, hit the website, download this and any previous episodes. We need subscribers for the podcast as well. Indeed. So please subscribe. Even if you can't listen to it every week, the subscription helps us out a lot. If you're a fan of the show and you want us to keep growing and you can't donate, you can't do any of the other things on the website, you can subscribe. You can subscribe on YouTube and subscribe to the podcast. It really helps the show out. You can follow me on all social media at RamsesJah.
I am Q Ward on all social media as well.
And we are Civic Cypher on all other platforms. So lock in with us there as well. And until next week, y'all.
Peace.